They laughed. They laughed because it was easier to judge than to understand. When Richard Weber, a millionaire who seemed to have the world at his feet, decided to follow the less conventional path, no one believed that his choice was driven by something greater than himself. On the other side, Anabell, a humble woman who life seemed to have forgotten, found not only a man, but a purpose. For many, it seemed impossible that two such different worlds could meet, but it was precisely in this encounter that an extraordinary story began to be written. While an elite made jokes and speculated about the reasons behind Richard's actions, he simply moved on, ignoring the weight of prejudice. He knew what no one else saw, that in this humble woman there was a strength that money could never buy. And when Anabell discovered that she was pregnant, the judgment only increased. "He's ruining his own life," they said. But what no one knew is that the next 5 years would make many regret every word they said. Today, this story is living proof that true love, combined with courage and resilience, can transform lives, not only for those directly involved, but for everyone who watches closely. Get ready, because what happened between Richard, Anabell, and Nicholas will challenge everything you think you know about overcoming, compassion, and the power of believing in a better future. Richard Weber was not just another millionaire. He was the kind of man everyone thought was unattainable, living a life surrounded by luxury and big money. But the truth is that even the most powerful carry their concerns. On an ordinary night, while waiting for a green light in the city center, he noticed Anabell, a humble woman, sitting on the sidewalk with a look that mixed tiredness and hope. That exchange of glances was all it took to break the invisible barrier between such different worlds. At that moment, Richard felt something that money could never buy: empathy. He got out of the car, moved, and with a simple, "Is everything okay with you?" he began a conversation that marked the beginning of a transformative journey. Surprised, Anabell hesitated. After all, why would a man like him pay attention to someone who seemed to have lost everything? But what she didn't know yet was that sometimes it's in the most unlikely places that we find the answers we're looking for. The connection between the two didn't come from fancy words or extravagant gestures. It was something simple, almost imperceptible. The way Richard listened to every word Anabell said, as if it were an important story, even though she thought she had nothing more to offer. He knew that behind all that vulnerability, there was a strength that not even she could see. That's how it is in life, isn't it? What we see in others often reflects something we wish to find in ourselves. The conversation went on longer than either of them expected. Richard was surprised to realize that Anabell had such deep dreams and thoughts about anyone in the corporate world that he had ever met. That night, something inside him changed. Maybe it was the fact that, despite all his wealth, he had felt empty for years, while she, with a little, still managed to smile and believe. Isn't it funny how sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the people we least expect? Anabell told pieces of her story. She lost everything at one point in her life, but she never lost her love for others. Richard, on the other hand, pointed out that his wealth often isolated him, making him question whether all that money had any real meaning. They were opposites, but perhaps that was what made their connection so special. If you've ever wondered why some people cross your path in such a challenging way, perhaps that was why. As they said goodbye, Richard promised to come back. He did. Not because he felt guilty or superior, but because in that brief encounter he found something he had long sought: humanity. He knew he was faced with a rare opportunity to not only help someone, but to transform them. After all, big changes start with small gestures. A coffee, a blanket, an honest conversation. Who would have thought that could mark the beginning of something so profound? What happened next was not an instant fairy tale. It was a process like everything in life. Richard knew that a unique connection takes time, patience, and, above all, trust. Anabell, without even realizing it, had already begun to teach him a valuable lesson: the value of love and the courage to move forward, even when all seems lost. And there, in that initial exchange, something began to be built, something neither of them could have foreseen where it would lead. Building trust is like building a house. Every word, every gesture, is a brick. And that's exactly how Richard started. He knew Anabell had reason to be suspicious. After all, she had been hurt by people who promised to help and then disappeared. So he started slowly, without rushing. A plate of food here, a sweater for the cold there. It wasn't about the material value, but about showing that he was there to stay. Anabell, on the other hand, didn't give in easily. Every time Richard showed up, she looked at him warily, as if trying to understand his true intention. And it was no wonder. How often does someone really reach out without expecting anything in return? But what Richard did wasn't extraordinary, it was simple. He listened, he showed up, he stayed. And little by little, this began to break down the barriers she had built over the years. It was during one of these conversations that Anabell began to open up, sharing details of her journey. She had worked through the difficult days, when she had lost her job, her home, and little by little, her hope. But even so, she never gave up completely. "There are days when all that sustains me is the memory of my mother's smile," she said. This touched Richard deeply. He saw that, even though he had everything, there was something essential missing, that quiet strength that Anabell carried. Richard knew that small gestures make all the difference. He began to show up with a book, a coffee, or even stories about his own life. Anabell laughed when he told her about the time he burned dinner while trying to impress a girlfriend. "Even millionaires make mistakes," he said, winking. It was this lightness that made the difference. Little by little, she began to smile more, to trust a little more. When Anabell revealed that she had always dreamed of studying, Richard saw an opportunity. He didn't offer anything directly, but he did share personal stories of people who had restarted their lives in unexpected ways. He told her about a humble woman who, at 50, finished college and completely changed her path. "Life doesn't end when we fall," he said, "it only starts again when we decide to get up." Those words stayed with Anabell. Trust wasn't earned with gifts or words alone, but with presence. He was there when she asked for it and, more importantly, when she realized she hadn't asked. One day, while they were having coffee together, Anabell looked at Richard and said, "You don't have to be here at all, but you are anyway." "Why?" And he replied simply, "Because everyone deserves a chance. And sometimes, helping someone else is also the way we help ourselves." As time went on, their conversations were no longer just about Anabell's past. They began to talk about the future, something she no longer dared to dream of. Richard saw in her a strength that she herself couldn't see. And he was determined to show her that, not with empty promises, but with actions. Deep down, they both knew that what they were building was much more than trust. It was the foundation for something greater. When Anabell found out she was pregnant, the shock came like an unstoppable wave. She had already faced enormous challenges, but now the responsibility of a new life would make her question whether she would be able to move forward. Richard, upon hearing the news, did not hesitate. As she considered how to handle the situation, he simply said, "We will work through this together." There was no doubt or fear in his voice, only the firmness of someone who had chosen to stay. Anabell's pregnancy announcement was not well received by everyone. Richard, a well-known and respected businessman, began to feel the weight of social judgment. Some people around him, including co-workers, questioned his decisions and insinuated that he was taking too many risks. "This could tarnish your confidence," they said. But Richard did not listen. He knew that protecting Anabell and the baby was more important than any other person's opinion. Even with Richard's support, Anabell faced moments of insecurity. "How am I going to take care of a child if I can't even take care of myself?" she confessed one day. Richard, with all patience, replied, "You are already doing that. Just the fact that you care and fight every day shows how strong you are." He reminded her that no challenge is greater than the human capacity to overcome, especially when there is love involved. Pregnancy brought moments of joy, but also trials. A complication in the second trimester almost led to her losing the baby, and it was Richard who found her at the hospital, holding her hand and assuring her that she would not face it alone. This episode not only strengthened the bond between them, but also revealed how much they were willing to fight for this new life that was coming. Criticism came from all sides. Richard's friends even questioned his sanity. "Why don't you just move on with your life and leave this behind?" He, with the serenity that only someone who is at peace with their choices has, responded, "Money is worth nothing if I can't use it to make a difference. And if being human means being judged for helping someone, then so be it." For Anabell, Richard was not only a support, but also an example. He showed her that facing prejudice head-on was a way of teaching people something bigger, that the choices they make out of love and empathy are always the most valuable. At a dinner with businessmen, someone suggested that he should reconsider his priorities. Richard simply asked and replied, "My priority now is to ensure that two people have a safe and happy future." Anabell's pregnancy became a turning point for both of them. It was not just about bringing a new life into the world, but about proving that courage and compassion can transform even the most complicated situations. As Anabell began to accept her role as a mother, Richard knew that this baby would not only be a life-changing event for her, but for him as well. Deep down, he felt that the greatest challenges were yet to come, but now, they were ready to face them together. Prejudice came like a storm, unexpected and relentless. When Richard and Anabell's story became public, many could not help but make nasty comments. Some members of the business elite did not hide their disapproval. A millionaire involved with a humble, pregnant woman? How absurd, they whispered in the hallways. But Richard, with his characteristic calm, took every look and every word as if they were mere drops of rain. Annoying, but incapable of stopping someone determined. For Anabell, the judgment was more cruel. People she barely knew began to treat her as if she had acted in bad faith, as if they had planned this relationship. "You got lucky," they would say, without imagining the cold nights she had endured alone, or the tears she had cried along the way. Richard, realizing the weight this had on her, reminded her, "Their opinions do not define who you are. You are much stronger than any words can hurt." At corporate events, Richard was often confronted with innuendos and jokes disguised as good intentions. "I hope you know what you are getting into," someone commented, while another suggested that he could make amends with a financial settlement. He simply asked and replied, "I already did. Find out what is really important." This serenity not only silenced critics, but also inspired others to question their own prejudices. Prejudice was not limited to words. Richard began to notice that some doors that had always been open were starting to close. Business partnerships were quietly ending, and important invitations stopped coming. For many, it was a clear sign that he was risking everything. But for him, it was an opportunity to redefine his life. "If I lose everything by choosing love, then I never had anything of value to begin with," he told Anabell one night. Anabell, even with Richard's support, had her moments of doubt. "What if they are sure?" she asked, feeling the weight of so much criticism. Richard held her hands and replied, "They only have power over us if we allow them to. But look where you've come, look what we've built. You are proof that resilience overcomes any judgment." These words were a foundation for her, and she began to walk more firmly, even amidst so many harsh looks. Over time, the couple's strength began to influence those around them. One of Richard's assistants once commented, "I never imagined you would do something like this, but it's inspiring." These small victories were proof that, although prejudice was strong, the truth had the power to open minds. And Anabell, who had recanted her testimony before the trial, began to see her worth as a woman and as a future mother. Prejudice never completely disappears, but how we face it can change everything. For Richard and Anabell, each challenge was a chance to reaffirm what they were building together. And as they faced these battles, I realized that the prejudice was not just against them, but against the idea that love and hope can flourish anywhere. Even in the midst of adversity, their fight was just beginning, and the future held even greater things in store. Nicholas' arrival was not easy at all. He was born prematurely, on a night that seemed like the longest of Anabell and Richard's lives. The weak cry that echoed through the delivery room brought as much trouble as worry. He was small, fragile, but full of life. From the beginning, Nicholas seemed to sense something special. Richard looked at that baby and said, "You are stronger than you look, my little one." And as you can imagine, Nicholas clung to life with the strength of a giant. The first few months were a true test for a family. Between hospital visits and welcomes, sleepless nights and silent prayers, Anabell and Richard support each other like never before. "He's a miracle," Anabell would say as she rocked her son. For Richard, every smile Nicholas gave was a reminder that he had chosen to fight against everything and everyone. The social pressure was still there, but it seemed small compared to the greatness of that little being. When Nicholas began to grow, he surprised everyone. At a very young age, he showed a peculiar interest in numbers. At the age of 3, he would solve puzzles that even adults would find challenging. At 5, he began to do impressive calculations. Richard, who had always believed in the power of learning, gave Nicholas a small math book, which the boy devoured with enthusiasm. That was when I realized he was special, a true prodigy. Nicholas' talent did not go unnoticed. A teacher, upon seeing him solve advanced problems for his age, said, "This boy has a bright future." This brought pride to the family, but also a new wave of pressure. Some people still questioned how a child from such different world could be so brilliant. But for Richard and Anabell, the answer was clear. The love and support he received from the beginning was what really mattered. Nicholas' journey began to change society's perception. The boy who was born too small to face the world was now conquering space with his intelligence. He participated in school competitions and impressed with his ability to solve complex problems in seconds. For Richard, this was a lesson to all who doubted. It doesn't matter where you come from, it matters what you do with the opportunities you are given. Nicholas became not only a source of pride, but also a symbol of hope. His story was a reminder that challenges can be overcome, and that love and dedication transform lives. Richard and Anabell began sharing stories of resilience with him, so that he could understand his roots. "You came to show us that true greatness is not in how you start, but in how you choose to grow," said Anabell. Nicholas's journey had only just begun, but it had already completely redefined their family's story. He brought with him a greater purpose, a force that brought Richard and Anabell even closer together. The world was still a judgmental place, but with Nicholas, they learned that the brilliance of a new generation can brighten even the darkest moments. And as they moved forward, they knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. When Anabell was invited to do a television interview, she hesitated. It was not easy to relive the most difficult moments of her life, much less share her story with millions of people. But Richard encouraged her, "Your journey can inspire others. It's not about what you went through, but how you overcame it." With these words, she decided to take on the challenge and show the world that true strength comes from within. The interview began with simple questions, but soon delved into sensitive topics. Anabell spoke about the nights they spent on the streets, about how life seemed to have taken everything from her. "I discovered that I no longer had hope, but sometimes life surprises us in ways we never imagined." The sincerity in his voice touched viewers, many of whom were able to see beyond appearances, reflecting on their own prejudices. When asked about her relationship with Richard, Anabell smiled and replied, "He didn't save me, he helped me save myself." This sentence reverberated like a slap in the face to her critics. She wasn't just a humble woman who was lucky. She was a warrior who, with support, rebuilt her life. It was at this moment that many began to see the strength she always had, even in the darkest days. Anabell's story gained even more impact when she accidentally shared her vision of Nicholas. "My son is living proof that love can transform everything. He is a miracle, but not because he is a prodigy, but because he shows us that when we believe in ourselves, we are capable of anything." Anabell's words not only moved the audience, but also shed new light on her family. The presenter, visibly moved, asked, "What would you say to anyone who is facing difficulties right now?" Anabell thought for a moment and said, "I would say that no matter how difficult it is, there is always a way out. It could be a friend, a stranger, or even an unexpected opportunity. The important thing is to never give up on yourself." Her simple but powerful message was shared widely on social media. The impact of the interview was immediate. People sent messages of support, shared their own stories of overcoming obstacles, and even offered opportunities to Anabell and her family. Once seen as a homeless woman, she was now a symbol of resilience. Richard, watching backstage, couldn't be more proud. "I always thought you were amazing," he said as she left the stage. The media didn't just highlight Anabell, but they also began to change the narrative around her. Audiences who had previously judged her story were now inspired by her courage. Anabell realized that her voice had power, the power to change perceptions and pave the way for others who, like her, needed a second chance. And as the cameras turned off, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new phase in her life. Nicholas' recognition as a prodigy was the turning point no one expected. Elite schools and academic institutions began to notice his talent. Articles were published, highlighting his abilities and questioning how a boy from such an inviting background could be so brilliant. For Richard and Anabell, this moment was not just about Nicholas, but about how love and support can transform lives. Public perception began to change. People who had previously looked down on Anabell with disdain now wanted to hear her story. "It's amazing how she stood her ground in the face of everything," she commented on social media. For Richard, this recognition was proof that sometimes the world just needs real-life examples to help it shake off prejudices. Anabell, for her part, didn't seek glory, she just wanted Nicholas to grow up knowing he was loved and valued. Nicholas, at such a young age, began to understand the impact he had on the world around him. "Why does everyone want to talk to me?" he asked one day. Richard explained, "Because you show them that impossible is just a word." For Anabell, her son's journey was a reflection of her family's struggle. Each of Nicholas's achievements was a reminder of the hardships they had endured together that had been worth it. But Nicholas's triumph also brought new challenges. The overwhelming attention from the media and society began to create expectations that could be crushed. Ever protective, Richard decided to keep Nicholas out of the spotlight when necessary, allowing him to grow with the freedom to explore his genius without pressure. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he told his son. "The only person you have to impress is yourself." As Nicholas thrived, Richard and Anabell felt their bond as a couple grow even stronger. Each victory for their son was a shared victory. "Who would have thought we would get here?" Anabell commented one evening as she helped Nicholas solve a complex puzzle. Richard replied with a smile, "I would have. Because I always believe in you. And now we're just getting started." Nicholas' story began to resonate with other families. People who had faced prejudice or struggled with financial hardship found him to be an inspiration. Anabell, in particular, received countless messages from mothers telling her that her strength was motivation. She began to use her voice to support others, proving that even in the face of adversity, it is possible to build a new story. The Weber family's triumph was not just about talent or achievement, but about the transformative power of love, resilience, and courage. They faced trials, overcame barriers, and proved that true wealth lies in human connection. And as Nicholas continued to walk his path, Richard and Anabell knew that the legacy they were building together was far greater than any trials they had faced. Do you see how one choice can change everything? The story of Richard, Anabell, and Nicholas is a powerful reminder that adversity does not define who we are, but how we face it. What seemed impossible to many became the greatest proof that love and resilience have unparalleled power. And if they were able to face judgment and change the course of their lives, what's stopping you from starting to transform yours too? Think about your challenges right now. What can you do today to take the first step towards a different future? Maybe it's important to consider your strengths, like Anabell did. Or maybe you can use what you have to impact someone around you, like Richard. Or even inspire others with your achievements, like Nicholas did. Whatever your path, the important thing is to take action. The world is full of judgments, but what really matters is what you choose to do with the opportunities that come your way. If this story touched you, just imagine how many other lessons are waiting for you. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this. Let's continue learning, inspiring, and changing lives together, one choice at a time. Are you ready to get started?